I think it's safe to say that despite all of the legends that stem from Group B rally racing, there's something special to be said for the Audi Sport Quattro. Along with Peugeot, it is the only car to put up a fight against Lancia's utter dominance of rally racing in the 1980s. As a result, the Audi Sport Quattro is responsible for 2 World Championship titles in 1982 and 1984 for WRC. The A1, A2, S1, and S1E2 variants showcase a specific, focused evolution of their all-wheel drive, turbocharged 5-cylinder platform. And now, 40 years later, it's the car we remember most. Just as important as the race car and its victories, however, is what it gave to us mere mortals, or at least a select few. If Audi wanted to take the Sport Quattro racing, they were required by the rules to build 200 of them for the street. Some of you may remember the beautiful 190e Evo 2 that we did a video on earlier this year. Well, it turns out that the owner of that car has pretty good taste, and because he liked the video and you guys liked the video, today we are back at Copley West in Costa Mesa, California to see his other car, this, an even more rare, even more special, and just as authentic 1985 Audi Sport Quattro. And today we are going to look at this car even more closely than we did the last, but before we do that, you guys know the drill. Here's the history lesson. Plenty of you might not even need a lesson, but for those that do, we're going to start with Audi's Ur-Quattro. It was first introduced in 1980 as Audi's answer to the question of whether or not all-wheel drive was well suited to consumer passenger vehicles. As it turns out, it was, and it's Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system that is often credited with saving the brand. But in our case, all I really care about is the car that it yielded. The box-flared, hatchback, 2-door design of the Audi Quattro is one of the best of all time. And yeah, I know you knew I'd probably say that because I've got an Ur-Quattro project of my own, and no, I haven't forgotten about it. We're still working on it. I just got one much bigger fish to fry at the moment, so give me a little bit of time here. But I digress, back to what's important. The Audi Quattro name carries a lot of weight, and that all stems from this car. The Ur-Quattro is the genesis of this turbocharged 5-cylinder platform from which all respectable Audis followed for years to come. But Audi wanted to take the Ur-Quattro racing and wanted to turn it up a notch. So they had to bring the Sport Quattro to market. The Sport Quattro shares its DNA with the Ur-Quattro, but it is a different beast entirely. It's known as a homologation special, a car built by Audi solely so that they could meet rules requirements to go racing. This car was born as a race car first and then brought to the streets. It has a number of notable features that separate it from its normal road-going Quattro counterpart, from its engine to its wide bodywork to its shortened wheelbase and newly swept windshield angle, just to scratch the surface. But this was a limited production car and only 214 were built in total. They were sold for a touch over 200,000 Deutschmarks, and that's an expensive car, around $80,000 at the time, or over $200,000 in today's money. But whether or not you're an Audi fan, this car probably stands as one of your favorites if you're familiar with it. Very few cars have a greater presence and a richer history to celebrate. It is an icon by any measure and absolutely worth celebrating. And that brings us to this car, one of the 214 Sport Quattros built between 1984 and 1985. And yes, I am behind the wheel at the moment, but the most I'm going to get to drive it is around the parking lot as we shoot our video. Because if I couldn't afford to drive the 190e Evo 2 last time, this one is a completely different ballgame. Specially spec'd cars and low mileage cars are able to clear $750,000 and upwards if the car is the right one. So, needless to say, insurance isn't going to cover me, but that's not going to stop us from enjoying this car today and showing you everything that it has to offer. When discussing all of the things that make the Sport Quattro interesting, it's tough to decide exactly where to begin. So I figured, why not start with the most obvious place of all,
the front end of the car. While the Sport Quattro is largely different in more or less every way from the Quattro, its front end is easily the most identifiable part. For those not in the know, it's also a good indicator of the type of machine we are admiring. From the triple grills across the bulged hood, to the mesh-clad holes throughout the front bumper, it's abundantly clear the Sport Quattro is trying to flow a lot of air through the front end and out of the hood, especially through the slats above the turbo. All of this wild venting is complemented by the 4 huge fender flares that protrude from each corner of the car. In total, they increase the width of the Sport Quattro about 5 inches over its standard counterpart. On top of that, a lot of the Sport Quattro's bodywork is made from fiberglass and carbon Kevlar. While it didn't do a ton, it did help to drop the overall weight of the Sport Quattro by 27 kilograms or about 60 pounds. For construction, the cars were hand-built by Bauer, responsible for those funny-looking E21s, but this time we got one of the best-looking cars ever.
However, I think there's one thing worth addressing on this car. It's time for a moment of brutal honesty, and I don't want to upset anybody here, but when it comes to the wheelbase on the Sport Quattro, I'd argue that it's kind of funny looking. It looks cool, but I don't know if I'd say that it looks good. I mean, it allows form to follow function, and there's a certain beauty in that, but on the other hand, I think if it weren't for this car's racing pedigree, its history, and its prowess, we'd probably all collectively agree that it's kinda stumpy and goofy looking. The widened arches only add to the effect, but at the same time, it's probably also one of the coolest factory wide bodies ever built.
That special bodywork was given to the car so that it could house bigger tires, which would help put its power to the ground, and that power is delivered by a very special engine, Audi's first to ever feature 4 valves per cylinder. It also utilizes an aluminum block which helps reduce the weight over the front end of the car. Displacement was dropped 11 cc's compared to the normal Ur-Quattro, but with 1.2 bar of boost, the Sport Quattro produces 306 brake horsepower, or an increase of 50% over the base model. Suffice to say, it makes for an incredible car to drive, and that brings us to where the car is driven, the Sport Quattro's interior. Just like the exterior, there are a lot of changes here that separate it from the base model we'd find in my shop. The centerpiece are these beautiful reclining Recaros, which are clad in leather on the outside and suede inserts in the middle, which in this case loosely match the Copenhagen blue paint on the outside. The Sport Quattro is fitted with 3 auxiliary gauges mounted just above the main air vents and a slightly revised switch for locking the differentials. What makes this car special, though, is the fact that the odometer has only turned 12,000 kilometers. For us Yanks, that's just under 8,000 original miles. Rally legend Walter Roll's signature adorns the dashboard, which only increases what makes this car special. And as a final quirky tidbit, I felt like I had to point out that despite the fact that this car has rear seats, there's no way anyone with legs could ever sit in them, given that the back of the front seat literally sits against the front of the back seat. For the curious, yes, there is a full-size trunk with a full-size spare on this car, so it could be used for real driving. But unfortunately, I won't know what that's like, because as mentioned, this is one insanely valuable car, and it's not something you're just tossed the keys to. At least, not in any normal circumstances, but I suppose for once, circumstances now are not quite normal.
Alright, slight change of plans. It turns out I am going to drive the car, and this is pretty sweet. This is beyond any expectation, but Pat at Copley West is, we're going to call this like the biggest favor of all time. So we're just going to go for a simple drive, but we're going to get some awesome turbo 5-cylinder sounds, get some awesome moving shots. This one's for you guys.
And to reiterate before anybody gets up in arms, no, this is not some awesome scenic mountain drive. This is a quick rip down the block on a busy, crowded street. It's an opportunity to see this car in motion and for me to experience what it's like behind the wheel, but regardless, I hope you guys truly enjoy at least a moment of blissful 5-cylinder symphony.
I can't get over the sound. It's really pure.
And I know that's not enough, but we gotta let the car warm up first. After a few laps up and down the street, yes, I was allowed to get on it for one good pull. This thing
Fucker builds.
It
builds.
It's way faster than it has any right to be. Go down here and turn around. Man, that's addicting. I know the video is a tease more than anything else, but the power delivery of the Sport Quattro was truly incredible, as was everything else that I experienced during my brief drive, including the brakes. I know this example has borderline no miles on it, so it drives like new, but it still feels truly incredible. It has me dying to get my Audi put together and out on the street as soon as possible. And yeah, I know in order to do that, I've got to stop making episodes like this out and about and get back to work in the shop.
But with that said, our 190E episode did reasonably well, and it's our hope that an episode about a real Sport Quattro will too. And if you guys liked this episode, then we've got to ask you to do your thing. Leave a like, leave a comment. Tell us what you like about the Sport Quattro or what you dislike about it, or just make fun of me. Whatever you're going to do, it all helps. And of course, subscribe if you haven't, because we can technically tell that some 70% of you guys that watch our content aren't even subscribed yet. It's about time. Come on. But if you guys like this episode and it does well too, then we will be back. We've got one more car in the chamber for you guys, and we are going to get behind the wheel of that one and thrash on it a bit. It's going to be just as cool as these, I promise you that. So you do your thing. We're going to go back to the shop and do ours. One final thanks to the guys at Copley West for letting us shoot this car, and we'll catch you next week.